Okay. Thank you all for joining. Welcome to the webinar today with Troubleshooting Network Issues with Auvik and Continuum. Just a few housekeeping notes. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available in a few hours from auvik.com/frankly MSP, and will also be available for distribution using the same registration link that you use to distribute to other team members as well. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, use the Q&A chat panel in your Zoom session. Auvik Community Manager Sam True will be helping moderate these questions throughout the presentation, and will be answering any toward the end of the webinar as well. Steve, do you just want to flick to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, my name is Elliot Cedo. I am the Technical Account Manager for the APAC region. I lead all the technical sales opportunities and conversations here, including right from evaluation through to ongoing support after you become a partner with us. Many of you on the call are already Continuum partners today. There are some that we haven't spoken before, so welcome. Part of my role is really to support our partners in their growth going forward. I was essentially employee number one about a year and a half ago in the APAC region, backed by Frank, who many of you met. So part of what I want to do, for those who aren't familiar with Continuum, just give a brief overview of what Continuum are and what we're about. So we're a global company backed by Thoma Bravo, a private equity firm with $18 billion worth of equity. We have a global presence now throughout the US through our head office in Boston, our main sales office in Pittsburgh, and the other offices in Houston, Atlanta. Our global office in London, sales office in London, as well as Sydney, here in North Sydney. And then Mumbai, Pune, and the Philippines for our services, our NOC and our help desk piece. We also recently acquired Brightgauge. It's added Miami to our overall global offices now. We help empower MSPs. We currently support over 6,000 partners globally and manage over 60,000 organizations through our SaaS-based platform. We have 1,500 employees today and growing. All right. We have fully managed services with over 700 NOC technicians based out of our offices in India, and 200 help desk technicians throughout 2 offices through Pittsburgh as well as Manila. We also, with our recent security services, have over 80 SOC engineers located through various offices as well. And today we manage over 1 million endpoints, desktop servers and mobile devices. So just a bit about what we do. Our core is really that Continuum RMM, all right, supporting the endpoints on the servers and desktops, right? Supported by our NOC. That's our main differentiator. We're fully managed 24/7 to basically provide you with the resources to grow and scale. All right. We use best-in-class technology supported with that service element, and we provide you with a single point of contact. What's important here is that we're 100% committed to the channel. So we are only supporting our MSPs and their ability to grow their businesses. We do have a security offering as well as our Continuum BDR suite, and various integrations with strategic partners, particularly Auvik, which we'll be discussing today. So I'm joined today by my co-host for this webinar, Steve Petryschuk. Steve.
Folks, thanks, Elliot, for the intro there. Much appreciated. My name is Steve Petryschuk. I run our systems engineering team here at Auvik. What that basically means is I lead our pre and post sales engineering, as well as all the technical training content that we do have. So good variety. I interact with a lot of different partners in a lot of different regions. basically my experience before Auvik included some time spent at a security VAR. So I've lived in the channel before, worked there, understand a lot of the pain you guys feel. And I've been with Auvik now for about 3 years. So really seen, our growth sort of accelerate. And so I take a lot of that experience working on the sales team into this technical role, out to our partner community to help them be successful and sort of, scaling their business as well. So that's a bit about me, a bit about Auvik. We are network management for managed service providers and IT service providers. What that means is our focus is network infrastructure devices. Any non-traditional endpoint on the network we want to discover and manage. We are 100% channel focused, so just as Elliot mentioned as well, on the Continuum side, we are a channel focused company, great working with partners across the world, and you'll see there about 1,800 of them total throughout the various geographies that we're currently present in. As you can tell by my funny accent here, I'm based in Waterloo, Canada. So if you guys are familiar with the company BlackBerry, they used to be based, they still are based in Waterloo, so that's our sort of claim to fame. So yeah, we've about 180 employees now, growing from just under 33 years ago when I joined. So definitely still in that growth trajectory. And that partner number, I think we update it every presentation I deliver because that continues to grow. And you may have seen that little polar bear in the bottom right-hand corner there floating around. That polar bear is named Nanook. He is our sort of polar bear mascot. A little bit of Inuit language I guess know-how here. Nanook actually just means polar bear in the Inuit language. So that's where the name comes from, to continue with our sort of Arctic theme. But we'll be focusing, oh, sorry. Anything else you want to add there, Elliot?
Yep, no problem. Just wanted to highlight Auvik have now got a Australian presence. They have Eric, who's going back and forth between Canada, and also Lewis, who started literally 3 weeks ago. If you looking at moving forward, we'll also facilitate a conversation or introduction to them, so that you know that we Auvik are serious about their expansion and working with our Australian partners.
Absolutely, and although it wasn't part of the content here that was written in, we do have Australian data centers as well. So if there's questions, concerns around performance or data residency, we do have a presence in Australian data centers as well. Perfect. So a bit about what we're going to chat about today. The whole idea of troubleshooting networks using Auvik, that is our forte. So I'm going to start off with just a little bit of sort of setting the groundwork, talking about why are we talking about networkings and why are we talking about it now, and what has changed, what is different. So a bit about the why. Then we'll sort of look at Auvik in action, and we'll do that by looking at a few real use cases of where Auvik has come in and helped our various partners sort of address their client needs or address an issue that they've been facing. Sometimes something that's been ongoing for a while that we've been able to help them with. Sometimes something that's just come up. But basically, we'll look at what that situation was, sort of what the root cause was, how we used Auvik to understand that issue and address it and resolve it. And then, through that, obviously, we'll handle the Q&A as it comes up. If you do have questions, feel free to submit them via that Q&A panel. Sam will sort of wrap them up and send them to us. And if it's right what I'm talking about at the moment, be happy to address it. If it's something that that isn't quite in the right context, we'll save those to the end as well. So feel free to submit questions. And we will be sort of diving back and forth a little bit between sort of the hands-on within the product and within the sort of slide we're here. So we'll jump back and forth as we work through these various use cases. So first, why networking and why now? Why are we talking about this today? And really, it's because the role of the network is increasingly becoming more critical to both our businesses as service providers and our clients' business. Our reliance on cloud services has ballooned, and it's not going to retreat anytime soon. So we use a whole bunch of web-based apps, cloud-based apps, and we're all connecting to them day in, day out. It's becoming an essential part of our business that we maintain a connection to the network and then to the internet to access a lot of those services. And so that's what it is for us, and our clients have the same needs, right? They also have a lot of cloud-based applications, some that you have potentially sold or positioned to them, other ones that they've adopted or brought in to their business to help support their business critical functions. So their reliance on the network is increasing as well. And now it's become vital to basically everything that they need to do their jobs. I can think about a couple of instances at our office at Auvik where, you know, there's an incident that occurs and a whole bunch of heads start popping up. Hey, is the internet down? Is the network down? And you know, a lot of work stops. We use a lot of SaaS-based applications, just like a lot of other businesses. You know, for us, it's things like, you know, Salesforce, and we're on a Zoom meeting, and you know, all these other web-based applications. And if I don't have that connection out to those applications out through the network, then my productivity stops. You know, we had an incident, and this happens to everyone at some point. We had an incident a few months back where, you know, you get into the work in the morning and someone says, hey, the network's down. Well, I just spent 45 minutes driving to the office. The network's down. I can't do anything. I spend 45 minutes driving back home. All of a sudden, I've wasted an hour and a half plus of time. And that's multiplied by every employee in the company. A lot of lost revenue, a lot of lost time. So the network really is critical. It's sort of become that gateway to everything that we need. And that's why we're talking about it today. It is sort of, you know, that glue that holds all these traditional endpoints and non-traditional endpoints together that allows us to access all those services that we need to do our day-to-day jobs. So it's our role then as service providers to help make sure that this critical asset is always up and always performing optimally to make sure that, you know, our clients can do their job. Because again, if the network's working, you know, no one really cares. No one comes and pats you on the back to say, hey, the network's working. But if it's not working, all of a sudden it's one of those things that, you know, everything's on fire and we need to address right away. So let's dive into some of the use cases. First, I'll sort of touch on what we call the case of questionable discovery. And this is more of an assessment and discovery use case where you walk into a client site, or maybe it's an ongoing client that you've had for a while, and you know, you either do that initial assessment, do the initial discovery, and they say, hey, you know what, I have about, you know, 5 switches or 10 switches, or basically this is the infrastructure that you need to manage. And we could take that at face value and understand that, yes, what the client is communicating to me is what I have to manage. But we have, you know, we all know, we've all discovered that one thing that they don't tell us about. So what I'll focus on here is we had one partner, they were based in California, and they basically had a manufacturing client come to them and say, I want you to manage my network. So they had Auvik deployed out into that environment, and the client had basically told them all about the office side of the network. But it was a manufacturing client, so they also had a whole manufacturing floor sitting behind that. So they discover those, you know, 10 switches within the office, but what the client didn't tell them about was the back, sort of that manufacturing floor. And if you guys have ever spent any time sort of in those manufacturing environments, there's a whole bunch of environmental problems. People are running over cables all the time. And more than once I've seen, you know, an Ethernet cable run 100 meters, then someone puts a switch there just to run another Ethernet cable 100 meters just because we've reached the limit of that cable. So it's about gaining visibility into that other half of the network. And that now becomes critical because you're going to be expected to manage and monitor that, even if it's not something that was sort of, you know, laid out at the onset. So being able to deploy that out there and do that discovery is critical, because when they call in and say, hey, the network's down, like in this case, the client actually phoned in and say, hey, our shop floor can't connect to anything, that network is down. And this is a manufacturing environment where they estimate it's about $25,000 an hour downtime. You know, even if it's down for an hour, that's a good sum of money, right? So leveraging Auvik, the client was able to go in, and I'll basically transition over here into the product a little bit. The client's able to go in and actually get alerted on things like default route changes or configurations being changed. So what they're able to do is actually see an alert and see on a device that a new configuration had been backed up. And they got an alert to say, hey, within the past hour, a new configuration was backed up. They were able to come in and actually do a restore of that previous configuration directly from within the dashboard, because they could still connect to it, it just wasn't passing any traffic. So now by restoring that configuration, they have that client site back up and running within that sort of 15-minute window, whereas the alternative would have been, hey, I think I need to do a truck roll, right? I need to send someone on site. I need to maybe do some troubleshooting. I don't necessarily have visibility into something that has changed, but it's definitely, you know, a lot longer response time and a lot more downtime. So even doing that truck roll, you have an hour drive there, the fix, an hour drive back, you're talking 4 hours worth of time at $25,000 an hour, 100 grand at least. I think they had estimated to us it would actually save them $1 million. But you know, just taking the hyperbole out of there, at least $100,000, which is still a pretty significant sum of money. So leveraging that visibility into what else is out there, and then gaining some visibility into what's changing over time made the difference here and sort of allowed that partner to get that client back up and running in a very short period of time. So that's sort of the first use case, is understanding what's out there, gaining visibility, helping to find some of those devices, and then having that visibility for when things go wrong, we're able to pick things up and resolve it pretty quickly. So going next here, this is probably one of my top 2 favorites that we'll chat about today, and it's sort of putting the punchline a little bit here early, but it's we call it the lights on, network out kind of use case. So it's one of those kind of issues where someone comes in the morning, and this was a partner in Texas, and apologies for a lot of the US based examples, but this was a partner in Texas who basically had a client come in the morning and say, no one can connect to the Wi-Fi. So that's not great, right? If we can't connect to the Wi-Fi, then I can't connect to the network. I can't access my cloud applications. It's all sort of what we just talked about a few minutes ago. And so I put on my network troubleshooting hat and start to think, well, how would I address that today? And I go back to the OSI model going, okay, do they have layer 1 connectivity? Do they have layer 2? Do they have layer 3 and an IP address? Start working through that whole stack. And that's great, but that can also take a lot of time. Oftentimes, if it's the end user calling saying, hey, I can't get on the network, can't get on the internet, you're dealing with someone who isn't as technical as you are, and they're maybe on the other end of the phone. Because they're not on the network, you probably don't have a screen share, so you're probably trying to guide them through this spot and that spot on the UI. It becomes pretty challenging to identify what that problem actually is. So using Auvik, what we can do is we can start to gain some visibility into what might be going on the network that's preventing them from accessing that network, right? So using our network scans, we're actually able to dive down and discover every single IP address that's out there. So if I dive down into something like my inventory and all devices, I'm now able to see every single device that I've discovered, and then I'm even able to go in to see all the different subnets and all the networks that are out there. So one thing that they were able to do in this case was actually look at all the different subnets, knowing or having some context about that client, about which network was their wireless network. They could quickly go in and see, based on the different networks, how many devices have connected to those subnets, how many devices are there on there currently. So if we take a look at, say, this /23 network at the top, there's currently 153 devices, which means out of the 512 IP addresses, I still have, 350 left, right? If this was, if I already was using all 500 and something of those IP addresses, that's going to tell me that I now have IP address exhaustion. And that's exactly what happened in this case. So the partner was able to come in here and see that it was actually a /24 network and all 254 IP addresses were taken. So a device was on every single one of those. All right, so now I know the problem, right? I know the cause of the issue is that we're all out of IP addresses. Well, why is that, right? That wasn't a problem yesterday. It wasn't a problem today. Well, now I'm able to pivot on that data and actually go in to see, well, what devices are those? So by going into inventory and devices here, I can actually see all the different devices that are connected to that network based on their different make and models. And what this partner did is they looked here and they saw a whole bunch of devices that were make and model Philips. So they were showing Philips as a vendor. Well, why are there a whole bunch of Philips devices on the network? And that's not a traditional endpoint, right? It's not a network device like a Netgear. It's not an access point like a Ubiquity, or to name a couple, right? But it wasn't something that was commonly seen on the network. Well, what they were able to do is actually track down that those Philips devices were light bulbs. So over the weekend, back to the lights on, network out, over the weekend, a contractor had been in there installing a whole bunch of new IP connected light bulbs onto the network. And wasn't malicious, wasn't doing anything wrong, but it actually consumed all the IP addresses on that network, causing an essential denial of service attack, so no one was able to connect. So I think about the old way of trying to diagnose that. I talked a little bit about having that client on the phone trying to troubleshoot, without a connection, without seeing what they're seeing, and that becomes really challenging. Now, when we can use some of the tools that gain visibility onto the network, we're able to take a task that was previously really difficult and troubleshoot it faster using level 1 or more junior tech. So we don't necessarily have to escalate it to the most expensive and the most in-demand people on our network or in our organization. So this is, like I mentioned, one of my sort of 2 favorite stories, and it's something that I'm sure we'll all see more over time as more and more devices get connected to the network. It's something that we as service providers have to be thinking about how do we plan for a lot of this this scale and network infrastructure, but definitely one that I think we'll see resurface again. So the next one that I'll sort of dive into is what we call the case of the lunchtime network pig, and I'll have to thank the marketing department for the nice graphics here, so we can all remember that whole pig image as part of this. So the whole idea here is that we often get those complaints like the network is slow or the internet is slow or my computer's slow, and those can all mean many different things, and it's often not clear, first of all, what the symptom actually is, because a lot of those are represented the same way to the client. But then it's also not clear what the cause of that symptom is and how to troubleshoot that bottleneck. We had a partner in Northeast US who basically had this issue where a client site was grinding to a halt every day at noon. And so it was every weekday, every weekend day, right at noon, things got super slow. And they had spent, number of weeks troubleshooting it and trying to deal with it. And eventually they sent someone on site for a couple of weeks with enterprise tools in tow to connect up to the network, to do things like TCP dumps and analyze it with Wireshark. And they weren't able to track that down. And that takes a lot of time. Right now they have to send someone on site and do that analysis. Again, it's not the most junior guy doing it. So definitely a lot, a huge investment to troubleshoot that issue. Now, fast forward to when we have Auvik deployed on that network, and this is, we helped this partner track this specific issue down. They were able to leverage the historical data that Auvik has collected over time to help troubleshoot that issue a lot quicker. So diving back into the Auvik console here, what they were basically doing is looking at something like my top interfaces report, and so they're seeing during that period of time, so we would dive into that specific time frame where something is happening, right? Noon yesterday or noon today or whatever day that is, or I could look at noon every day if I wanted to, but I could look at the top interfaces during that time. And what they identified is that there was one specific interface that during that period of time, it was spiking up to about 80%. And it was sort of that critical bottleneck out to the network. And this is where that topology becomes critical as part of the troubleshooting process. So knowing that an interface is busy is one thing, but knowing the context of that interface is much different. If we take a look at my topology map here, this link between my core switch and my firewall is now a critical link in my network, right? It is the gateway to everything, versus an interface connected down here on my VoIP phone that is, although it's probably important that that phone is operational, it's not as critical, it's not affecting every single user. They actually tracked down which interface was having these performance problems. And of course, I don't have that specific example that I can recreate right here, but by looking at the interface dashboard, they actually look to see which device it was connected into. So if I dive into a specific interface, we can see what port a device is connected into, and then what is connected on the other end of that port. So using the visual topology, they were able to identify that that interface was connected to a backup appliance. So the actual manufacturer of that backup appliance is sort of irrelevant because this could happen to any any backup appliance. But basically what they discovered is that this backup appliance every day at noon was sending a lot of data to its offsite cloud backup. Diving into that specific device, they noticed the configuration on it was actually set to backup at noon instead of at midnight that would have been the intended time to do that backup. Perfectly honest mistake. Someone was setting it up and it was accidentally set for 12 noon instead of 12 midnight. But to try and find that issue, it was really challenging because no one thought to look at the backup appliance. The complaint wasn't, hey, backups are taking forever and they're happening at noon. The complaint was network is slow. So using that visual topology to help you troubleshoot the issue, and then using that to reveal exactly what device is connected in there, helped identify the root cause. And then taking it a step further, they can set that to the proper timeline and have it actually do that backup at midnight instead of noon, was ultimately the resolution. So this one is probably one of my other top ones here. I think I'm stretching the truth in that probably a lot of them are my favorite stories, but we call this one the case of the frozen firewall. And this is basically that situation where someone calls you and instead of the internet being slow or the network being slow, the internet's down and the network is down. And so having the context again to identify, what is unique about this internet is down or network is down situation is definitely critical. So in this case, the initial resolution to this case of the frozen firewall was, you know what, let's just reboot it. Because we've all been there, right? The common IT fix is, have you turned it off and turned it back on again? I've done it. Everyone else can probably put up their hand as well. But ultimately, we want to understand what happened and why it happened, because we don't want it to happen again, right? Getting the fix in and understanding the root cause are two different things, and doing the latter, understanding the root cause, allows us to shift to being proactive and really servicing our clients as opposed to just being in that reactive nature. Hey, the network's down, okay, reboot it. So we have to answer the question, what actually happened? And then go on to say, well, how do I prevent that from happening again, right? And so we'll provide a lot of that context within our dashboards to help understand, well, what happened leading up to that, right? What was happening just before the device went offline? And so in this case, what we're actually going to start doing is we're going to look at that firewall dashboard. And again, because this is a situation that happened on an actual client site, I can't show you that within my topology map, but I can sort of, bring you to that similar dashboard where I would come into that device, come into that firewall, look at the period of time just before it rebooted, whether that's the last few hours or yesterday. And I can start to look at things like the performance during that time beforehand, or the device utilization during that time, so I can gain some visibility into what was happening. In this case, when we take a look at the device utilization graph, I saw over time that it's starting to track up to that top, sort of from the bottom left to the top right on the memory utilization. And then diving into the sort of troubleshooting view, what they were then able to see is that there's actually a whole bunch of alerts that triggered at different times throughout this process. So they can start to see, hey, there's alerts that are triggering. And there's a whole bunch of alerts where it's going above 90% and below 90% memory utilization. And those are triggering on a fairly regular basis, with the trend being over time, that memory is creeping up and up and up and up. So there was actually an alert that was generated for that memory utilization high. At the time, it was one of those things that someone had sort of pushed aside. It's not critical, right? But now looking at the history, that would be a more critical event. The memory creeping up over time directly caused the firewall to freeze. So now we understand the root cause, right? Now, from here, we understand what's wrong. Why is the memory creeping up? Well, that's one place that requires a little bit further investigation. How would I actually resolve that? Well, I would look to see, is there a firmware update available from the device, or is there, known issues with the specific firmware version? And I could sort of, do that or schedule in that firmware upgrade. Or is this device just really, really busy? By the CPU utilization, it doesn't look to be the case, but it could be that this device is really, really busy, and now I have the opportunity to upsell them on a larger firewall because maybe they've grown and haven't necessarily communicated that back. But I can look at this history to understand what sort of the root cause was. At minimum, I'm going to start to schedule that reboot and be proactive rather than waiting until I get that sort of network is down again, because I can see this creeping up over time. So I set an alert for myself that says, hey, when the memory utilization gets to here, I better reboot that. Otherwise, I'll have the client calling me in a panic. So at least it allows us to be more proactive and schedule at a time that's convenient for us instead of inconvenient.
Just a reminder to all the attendees, if you do have any questions, Sam True is moderating. She's from Auvik. If you'd like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A button in your Zoom panel, and we'll answer as we go, and potentially toward the end of the session as well. Thank you.
Thanks, much appreciated. I did actually use it to grab a drink of water as well. So. So the next one I'll dive into is one that we call sort of the case of alarming alerts. And this is one where we're actually using Auvik to troubleshoot a network issue that isn't something that has sort of surfaced as a complaint from a client, but it's again shifting us more into that proactive sort of side of things where we can identify network issues, identify those low and slow issues that maybe have been, a little annoyance for people over time, but haven't necessarily resulted in that everything's on fire call to the help desk. So in this case, we had a partner that was getting some alerts, and they were trying to troubleshoot if this was related to a specific server-related, server slow kind of issue. And so what we basically did is we dove in to look at, well, what's happened over the past week and what's happened with those alerts. So by diving into the alert history, I can look at things like the last week worth of data to really see if there's any repetitive alerts or any things that are commonly happening, anything that I definitely need to pay attention to. So I'm going to look for trends. We talked about that lunchtime network pig. Every day at noon, there was an issue. That's a trend that I can identify with the alerts. I can also identify if there's always the same device, right? Here we see a lab switch that seems to be triggering a lot of alerts. So I look for trends. In this case, what we actually had is we had a number of high interface utilization alerts. And when we dug into it, those alerts were actually happening on two specific interfaces. And to bring up sort of screen captures of those interfaces, we basically had two super busy interfaces that were pushing a lot of data at regular intervals. And you can see these patterns here. If we look at the left and right, they often match up, right? They look very similar in traffic pattern. And those alerts were triggering on those two fairly regularly. So traffic pattern itself looks very similar, right? Having the historical data here means I don't need to wait for that issue to happen again to start to diagnose it. I can look at the historical data and I can quickly see from this visualization, right, without having to, do SNMP packet captures, or sorry, SNMP counters. I don't have to look at packet captures or anything like that. I have the data here in front of me and it's already being monitored. And I notice that one has a lot of yellow in it, very simply put, and one has a lot of green in it. Well, that's something different, right? Why is one yellow and one is green? And what does that really mean to me? So taking a quick look at our legend here, yellow is all the transmit and receive is all green. So one in these two interface details, one is doing a lot of transmitting and one's doing a lot of receiving. So that's an important point to note, right? What I can then do is use that topology diagram again to understand what devices those specific interfaces are connected into. And when we dove into this one, we identified as both of those interfaces were actually connected into the same ESX host. So again, marrying that topology with the alerts provides a lot more context for the alerts. Rather than just saying, hey, there's a busy interface, it's now there's a busy interface connected into my ESX host. And there's two of them. And one is doing a lot of transmitting and one is doing a lot of receiving. So in this case, we actually have two physical interfaces where we're essentially getting the throughput of one, because we have one interface doing all the transmit, the other doing all the receive. So instead of getting a full 2 gigabit per second up and a full 2 gigabit per second down, I was essentially hitting a bottleneck at 1 gig up and 1 gig down, basically getting the same performance as I would get with the 100 or 1 gigabit full duplex link. So someone had set up link aggregation on this ESX host, and when they had set it up, it was actually done incorrectly. So again, what happened. No point in diving into the why, but now we've identified that problem, and we're able to add in a resolution and make changes to that that configuration, so they do get the full intent here, and they do get 2 gigs up and 2 gigs down, and will not only reduce the number of alerts that they're getting, but also then improve the performance of this device during those key hours, so they're not getting that low and slow, hey, network is slow kind of complaint. So definitely, valuable to dive into and see some of these alerts and some of these trends. And again, not having to wait for that issue to happen again, to be able to look at the historical data and then marry that physical topology with the data to really get actionable items out of it. So this is great to help us understand sort of, a lot of the how much kind of issues, right? Traditionally, network management platforms are really good at telling us when things are slow. We add on that physical topology to help us identify where things are connected. But it would be great as well to start to understand not just the how much, right? How much data, but what is that data? So in the case of those graphs we were just looking at, we're able to determine that it's data related to one of those VMs, but what is the actual content, and is it business critical traffic or is it not business critical? And I eventually want to get more visibility into what that traffic is. And so one thing that we are adding in here with Auvik is the ability to gain visibility into not just the how much, but actually what is that traffic and who is that traffic. So I'm going to chat a little bit about traffic insights, which is basically a NetFlow-based product that is currently in a private beta, will be released in GA soon, where we're actually starting to gain visibility into the actual traffic. So built on top of NetFlow, we're leveraging other metadata like geo-IP addresses, and we're looking at trends in the data to identify applications that are within encrypted traffic to actually understand a little bit more about what is the traffic and where is it going. So a couple of key use cases that I'll focus in on is that sort of network is slow type complaint, right? So say, this giant spike of traffic, if I want to drill in to figure out, well, what's going on during that time, I can quickly dive into that specific time period and look at the mix of traffic over that time, what sorts of traffic I'm getting. I can then pivot on that data to say, well, who is using that data over that time? Who is sort of responsible for that? So if I wanted to focus on something like the streaming protocol, I can quickly see how much that data or how much of that data is being passed, and then pivot on it to say, well, who is that? And I can quickly see based on their IP address and then marry that with the Auvik topology, who it is and where they're connected. So here the IP address is 10.0.41.32. I can jump back into the Auvik dashboard and see that here's that device. And I can look at the interface list to figure out how they're connected back into the network, quickly tracking down, pulling a plug if I need to, or advising someone on site to do that, or picking up the phone and saying, hey, it looks like this device, marrying that with some other data I have inside the RMM platform. Who is that? And start to take action to remediate that. So you can start to identify, not just, hey, things are busy, but then further narrow down, well, who is it that's causing it to be busy and what are they doing? What applications are they using? The other key use case we'll be able to address is understanding, if there are maybe non-critical business applications that are being used inside the environment. So one that I like to focus on is on the file transfer side, right? And maybe there's a security implication here, or it may just be a usability, right? Maybe this application is using a lot of bandwidth on the site. If I look at my file transfer applications, I have a ton of Dropbox that's being used here on my network. And in this case, it's allowed within this environment, but there might be other cases where maybe that's not an allowed or an approved application. Or maybe there's more of a commercial ask here from your team. I know other file transfer applications, there's a lot of partners that will resell a specific one. And if you're not reselling the one that they're using, maybe we should be looking at providing that service. Rather than sort of being that police, we can enable them by providing them sort of a managed license for it. So taking a look at this, I can now understand, all right, well, here's an application that's in use on the network, who is using it, and again, pivoting on that data to understand what devices are using that application and start to, again, if it's something that's not allowed, stop it. Or if it's something that is allowed, I can approach that user, approach the business, and understand if there is that business need, and then start to position it with that client. So traffic insights is something that is up and coming, and something that it will be available to all partners. So look forward to bringing you more here as that as more news is announced as the weeks go on here. So you might be asking yourself, hey, this is all stuff that I do. So, I already manage the network. Thanks, Steve, for the few stories, but what's really in it for me? If you're already doing a great job at proactively managing and monitoring the network, that's great. One thing that I did want to sort of point out is that a lot of partners are not necessarily monetizing that service today either. So if you're not positioning and not talking about this service that you're offering, you definitely should be. And so we have some resources in our prospect pitch and sell kit that can help you position managed network services to help increase your revenue and sort of make more money through 2019. If it's something that you look at this and say, hey, you know what, I'm not quite sure I have that visibility today, that's definitely something that you can chat with Elliot and team after our webinar here today to get a little bit more information on. These resources on our prospect pitch and sell kit are available at auvik.com/grow, and that can be provided after the webinar here as well. And if you're already a partner, you can leverage materials in our partner portal. As well, I did want to point out that we do have our Frankly MSP community on LinkedIn. It's a vendor-neutral community, so we welcome all people to join. It's not plugging Auvik. We have complementary solution providers, competitors in there. It's basically a platform for everyone to sort of talk about managing networks and the challenges associated with it. And one thing that I will mention as well is that a lot of the things that we talk about today through these different troubleshooting use cases are all generally addressed via a network assessment. So most of these issues I can uncover during that initial onboarding or initial prospecting phase. So if you're interested in getting more information about how to leverage Auvik in that network assessment phase, we do have a step-by-step guide on how to slam dunk a network assessment, as well as a template for how to present those findings back to the client within that same prospect pitch and sell kit. So maybe I'll do a quick check if there's any questions that have come in from Sam or Elliot there.
No questions as yet. Just a reminder, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A button in the Zoom panel. We've got about 20 minutes left on this webinar. Want to definitely make use of Steve's time today. To get things started though, Steve, I did have one come from a different partner who's not on the call today. Does Auvik manage firmware updates on network devices?
That's a great question. So one of the things that we do really well is getting visibility into what's deployed out there. So we talked about that a little bit through that initial discovery and understanding in that switch use case, which switches are out there, where they load, what devices are they, what IPs do they have, make and model. One of the things we do pull down is firmware versions, and through third-party integrations with PSA platforms and documentation platforms, we're able to push a lot of that information into these third-party tools. At this point, we don't go out and push a firmware update. I always like to use the sort of Windows analogy, where how many different supported versions of Windows are there? The answer is I could probably count on one or two hands, right? There's a very limited number of server and workstation versions. So to push an update to those, it's a very standard. With network devices, there are literally hundreds of vendors and thousands of network devices. And so it's a very complicated problem to solve. So that's definitely where the industry is going. But managing that update is not something that we do here today. Did have a question on what device does the Auvik agent run on? So that's a good question. We call our agent the collector, just a nomenclature thing at that point, but our collector is deployed in a couple of different ways. One would be on a Windows host alongside other services, so it's more like a service that you can deploy within an existing client site. We also have a dedicated Linux-based collector that you can deploy in a virtualized platform or on a physical platform, and that would be more of like a virtual appliance model where it is a full virtual appliance. We do support both. There's feature parity between the two. It just depends on what you have available in your client environments. So we definitely see a mix of those as well. So hopefully that answered those first couple of questions. Before we dive into the next ones that come in, I did just want to point out as well, we talked a little bit about, if you're looking at doing something, I guess a little bit more with Auvik, you can definitely talk to Elliot here after the call, or you can book a demo at this auvik.com/continuum19, and we'll give you a $5 coffee gift card. Now, I'll have to clarify whether that's AUD, which I would imagine it would be, but we'll definitely get that over to you. And Elliot, I don't know if you wanted to comment a little bit about the rest of the team there, if everyone on the call knows the rest of the team.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. Yeah, I think many of you are already familiar with the team here. Obviously, Frank Bauer, Director of Sales. He's been around the way with Continuum and even with Continuum before we came Continuum. So he's been around a number of years. Many of you are familiar with him. We also included Scott Jeffries. He joined us in July last year, or June last year, as an account executive. We're slowly growing the team out. We will be adding additional heads this year. So we're excited about that. In addition to that, as any more questions come through from the attendees, Auvik will also be joining us at our Navigate APAC conference, which will be scheduled on April 30th and May 1st, and will be held down in the Crown Casino in Melbourne. That's going to be exciting. You'll get the opportunity to meet some of the Auvik team there. And additionally, meet some other vendors and potentially learn a bit more about our security suite. If you're interested in that, you've probably already seen emails come through from our team, but I've also adding the link into the chat screen for everyone to have access to that. If you have any questions on that, please let us know. Additional question that came through regarding pricing. We can have a conversation about that. But Steve, did you just want to cover off what Auvik do around the pricing model there?
Sure, yeah. So good question. So pricing is actually based on what we call a billable device, funny enough. And so it's based on the number of network infrastructure devices that we manage and monitor on that site. So there, you do get a volume discount based on the total number of devices across all of the clients. So it is scaling based on total volume, but it's based on basically a router switch firewall count. So we talk about that we'll see every single device on the network. Anything with an IP address we'll discover, like those Philips light bulbs, but we're only going to bill you for the core network infrastructure devices.
Great, thank you for that. We'll give everyone a couple more minutes. Any other additional questions? In terms of the evaluation, if you choose to proceed with a demo and an eval, you will be engaging with us, the APAC Continuum team, but we'll be looping the Auvik team directly in as a product matter experts as part of our strategic partnership. We get them heavily involved in through the evaluation to help you get set up. All right. Steve, I don't think that's you directly. That's a few other team members. I think Katrina and Tyler get involved in that. So feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions there. Okay, I think we've made some good time here. No additional questions that I can see coming through. We'll probably call it a day. Thank you all for joining today. We'll let you get back to your day. I'm sure you're all busy. Steve, appreciate you taking us through that today. I think it was very helpful. I learned a lot. Sam, thank you a lot for facilitating and helping organize this.
Yep. Thanks a lot for having us, Elliot. Much appreciated, and look forward to hearing more from everyone on the call as well after today's session.
Perfect. Thank you all. Have a great day. I'll be shutting down the broadcast now.